Hi guys, let's do a tutorial on these dimensional drinks book sleeves. I condensed this tutorial as much as I possibly could for you so that you didn't have to sit through a really long tutorial, but let's get started. We're going to start off with our Tumbler Blank. This is a 20-ounce straight AF tumbler from Mother Tumbler, and I am applying adhesive apothecary glitter glue to adhere my glitter, and I'm ombreing Legend and Nude together from PDB Creative Studio. Two of my favorite glitters. They blend really well, and these glitters are really going to bring out the aesthetic of the entire cup. So I'm really excited about it. You'll notice I don't glitter a big chunk of this. That's because that's where the book sleeves are going to go, so I didn't really feel the need to waste glitter and glitter the whole thing. But other than that, I'm just ombreing them into each other, and make sure you get the actual bottom of the cup as well, because that will show after we put our tumbler together. I then sealed this glitter with clear spray paint, and I applied one thick layer of epoxy to this, okay? So I needed that extra layer of epoxy before I put my book sleeves on it, because the tumbler just wasn't thick enough, in diameter to fit in the book sleeves. So that's what we're doing here. Make sure you sand this tumbler really well you'll see that my glitter glue is repelling a little bit. That just means that I did not sand this tumbler enough, but it's totally fine. And that's the clear spray paint that I use. But while that is spinning on our tumbler, let's go ahead and start with our books. So I'm using all 3 book sleeves. If you look up there, you'll see the decal we're going to be using. And I'm using the tan paint from the Flippin' Awesome Paints package that I got. And I am going to paint all 3 books where the pages are going to be. So I'm doing all 3 books the same color, and I did do 2 coats of this, and I like these little paintbrushes because it was kind of easy to, stay in the lines and not make a huge mess. And trust me, a little goes a long way with this paint. Like, I didn't have to squeeze more than a couple drops on here to get all of the page parts done, if that makes sense. But I definitely do recommend 2 coats of paint if you're using this paint. If you're using a different paint, maybe you won't need to do 2 coats, and that's fine. But I really liked this color. We're going to let those dry, and now we need to paint the tops and the spines of our books. So you're going to paint each book a different color. I'm only going to show you doing one because, you understand the process there. So I started with this yellow one because it matched the vinyl. And once again, I'm doing 2 coats, and I'm doing the top, the spine, and then the edges. I didn't do the bottom yet. I'm going to wait till everything else dries to do the bottom so that we don't damage the paint, and it's just easier to hold this way. So I end up using that dark steel blue and the baby blue as well. I just got the whole Flippin' Awesome Paints package, so I definitely recommend getting that so that you have a lot of colors to choose from if you choose to get the paint I did. But it gets really good coverage, but if you look closely, you'll see that you'll need a second coat. So after that's all done and dried for about 2 hours, now we can do the bottoms. The bottom isn't as important. It doesn't have to be perfect, but when the tumbler is all said and done, you do see bits and pieces of the bottom of the books. So that's why we are taking the time to go in and paint those as well. I'm going to be honest. I did not clear spray paint all of these books when I was done. And I think that's something that you should really do because your epoxy can repel the paint. So make sure when your paint is all dry that you go in and you seal these with a clear spray paint so that your epoxy doesn't repel it like it did mine. It wasn't a huge deal. I sanded it down, I fixed it, but I wanted to make sure that I told you guys that so you don't make the same mistake I did. This is striped vinyl from Gracefully Created as well. I just cut them to size, and I'm putting them on the spines of all of my books. I love this vinyl. It matches the decal so well, and I just thought it'd be really cute on all of the spines. And you're given so many different shades of colors that you can still make each spine look a little different. So that's what I'm doing here. This vinyl is so stretchy and removable, so it's really great and easy to work with, and it doesn't damage the paint. So there's all 3. All right, now we're going to apply this to our tumbler. First, I'm using the Roller Rotator tumbler from Dino's. It comes up really high, so it's really great for these 3D pieces, and you can also angle. And I'm just kind of using, the pen didn't work, but I'm using a Sharpie so that I can kind of see where I want to glue my first book. I chose to use UV resin. If I was doing this again, I think I would have just mixed up a little bit of epoxy, applied it the same way, and then let it cure fully. And I say that because The UV resin, after I put it on, there's not areas for the UV lamp to really get in. So I had to cure this with my UV lamp like for 20 minutes to get in all those cracks and crevices, when I think it would have just been easier with epoxy, but it still worked. So, you know, it didn't really matter that much. So I'm just doing one book at a time. And you'll see, I didn't paint the insides of the books like in that circle area because you're not going to see that. And this is where you're going to want to angle them. You know, angle your books exactly how you want before you put them on and cure it to your tumbler. Here's the bottom one. I love it. And I did leave a little bit of the tumbler showing. Here I still have that little gap, so I'm just sticking some UV resin in there. I didn't want to epoxy my glitter tumbler again, and then it'd be too thick with the epoxy to fit in. So we kind of just went with this route, and I knew that it would all blend together in the end, which it did. UV resin is really great for this because it cures super fast. So this is just like an added layer of protection to make sure it's adhered to my tumbler really well. Now I'm also going to UV resin the spine of the books. Why? Because this vinyl I applied directly to a painted base, and I knew that if I epoxied it, there was a really good chance of the vinyl lifting at the corners because it was just sticking to paint, you know, not like a super flat, clean surface. So by applying UV resin to just the spines and curing it really quick, it kept my vinyl from lifting. Here I'm just touching up a little bit of the bottom of the tumbler because there was just some white areas showing still. All right, now we're going to do our handle. I'm just using that same blue paint that I used in the books to match the handle. I didn't glitter this. I didn't want it glittered. You know, I wanted to accent the books really well. So I'm just painting that too. And then we're going to use UV resin to apply it to our tumbler. So I kind of did half, let it dry, and then finish that other little area. All right, now we can apply it exactly where we want it. This was easy because the UV resin dried in like 2 minutes. So I've stuck it exactly where I want, held it in place, and used my UV lamp to cure it. This is where I would take all of your tumbler outside and spray it with a clear spray paint so that your epoxy does not repel the paint and the handle and the books, okay? So now we need to apply a thick layer of epoxy to our entire tumbler. I'm using a facet epoxy because I was really excited and I really wanted to get this tumbler done. So I'm just mixing equal parts of part A and part B, and I added a little bit of fairy dust mica powder from PDB Creative Studio in this just to give everything an extra sparkle. And I'm going to use my hand on the top of the tumbler. I'm making sure I'm getting in all of the cracks and crevices. And then you're going to see me use a paintbrush. You don't want a ton of epoxy to collect around your books. So if you're doing a really thick coat and you're not careful, a lot of that epoxy is going to hide and collect in all of those cracks and crevices and then form air bubbles. So make sure you're taking your time. You're doing a nice, light, thin coat. And if you notice epoxy collecting in any area, so you kind of wipe it up with your finger. So I started with the top first and I made sure I got the handle really well. Now I'm doing the bottom. And then I can focus on the books. Obviously, the books took a little more time. It was a little harder, but I just took my finger first and tried to spread it everywhere I could. And then I got out a paintbrush to kind of get in those cracks and crevices that my hand missed. Okay. If you choose to use facet epoxy, you know, remember that you don't have a ton of working time. So if using regular epoxy makes you feel more comfortable, I would do that. I did turn off my tumbler for a few seconds so that I could focus on certain areas, but don't do that for too long because then your epoxy will kind of drip down if it's not constantly spinning. So taking my finger and I'm getting all over all of the books. If you look closely, you'll see that it did repel in some areas. Like I said, make sure you are using a clear spray paint to seal your paint so that this does not happen to you. Okay. Taking my sweet old time here. I did speed this up, but I wanted to make sure that like you saw my entire epoxy process for this. Long pause. I really should add like some music in this or something. Okay, now we're going to get out our paintbrush. So as you'll see, I'm just kind of rubbing that paintbrush along all the edges and wiping off any extra epoxy that collects. And this is how I can kind of make sure that there's not going to be epoxy collecting in certain areas. And this is just an Arteza paintbrush. They're disposable, so I'm not worried about ruining any paintbrushes. But this just makes it a lot easier to make sure I didn't miss any parts, if that makes sense. Long pause. But next we're going to be applying our vinyl and doing our trees. So I'm really excited. We're going to let this dry for about 8 hours. All right, guys, I'm taking my sanding paper and I'm just sanding around the rim a little bit and in certain areas. I'm making sure I'm not sanding where I want my decal to be, though, because when you're using a white cast decal, you want it over a shiny base, not a sanded base. So I really like these sanding pads. These ones are from the Crystalac company as well. I just absolutely adore them. So I use them on almost every cup. Wiping that off with a baby wipe, getting the bottom really well. See, if you look closely, that's where it repelled. But like, it's literally fine. I actually just went outside and put a clear coat of spray paint on it. So it was ready for epoxy again. All right, here is the decal. This is from Gracefully Created. One of my friends, Kayla, actually made this decal, and I linked her below if you are interested in buying the digital. I love it so much. And then I also took those same stripes we used on the spine and put them right down under my handle. So that just kind of accented it a little better and hid any imperfections I had in my glitter. So I can't even believe that all of these colors pulled together so well. I'm not usually a like yellow or mustard yellow, orangish person, but like this color is everything. All right, guys, this part is optional. If you want to make the trees, I used a mold. I'll be honest, I did not love this mold. It was very flimsy, but I wasn't confident in sculpting them myself, so I made it work. This is just black Sculpey clay. I worked it in my hands and used my acrylic rolling pin to soften it up. And now I'm just putting it in the mold and kind of pushing it in so it gets that shape. I ended up using one big tree and one little tree. I made a bunch more, but I just didn't like more than the two on my tumbler. So if you're following this exactly, you'll just need one big tree and one little tree in black. So you can pull it out, and then I take an X-Acto knife to kind of touch up any areas. Like I said, the mold itself, it wasn't great, but it's what I had on hand, so I'll still link those below. It came in like a big Christmas package, so if you're interested, you can grab that. I always use the X-Acto knife to touch up any areas, and I also use this Arteza tool just to kind of add more indents in any areas that lost the detail from the mold. Just making like tiny little lines to roughen it up a little bit. And then I'm going to bake this at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for about 25 minutes. These are really thin, so I don't think you need much longer than that. And you're going to bake them on a blank stainless steel tumbler. Why? Because this is going to allow it to bake with that curved shape so it fits on our tumbler perfectly. So I'm using very light pressure to make it stick on my tumbler. And like I said, you'll see I have 5 trees here, but I only ended up using 2 of them. Make sure you're baking this on a blank tumbler, okay, so that it's still safe in your oven. You obviously don't want to put any glitter or epoxy in there, okay? I also like to use the sponge to kind of apply more pressure to get it stick to the cup because this doesn't damage the detail at all, so it's a really nice tool. All right, now that they baked and they're cooled down, let's go ahead and apply them to our tumbler. I'm just using Liquid Fusion. This is like my go-to glue. It dries in about 15 to 20 minutes, and I'm putting one on the left of the handle and one on the right of the handle. Okay, all right, now you can go ahead and put your last coat of epoxy on your tumbler. You can follow the steps earlier on how we epoxied, and this is the final result. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know, and thank you.